Hi, Premier Smith. Pleasure to welcome you back to the program. Thanks for making the time.
Hi, Vassy.
I wanted to start off on the Premier's meeting with the Prime Minister, and more specifically, if you have any information you can share with Canadians. We were all kind of watching that meeting yesterday, I think, trying to parse apart what it means for, in particular, the trade war that's kind of going on right now between our two countries. At one point, Donald Trump seemed to indicate, the president, that the tariffs that were in place would remain in place, but that no more tariffs are necessarily coming. Was that by any chance conveyed to you by the Prime Minister?
Well, I think what they were looking for was a reset on the relationship, and I think that it is successful. When you look at, first of all, the fact that the meeting that they had went on a little bit longer, I think, than they expected, instead of 45 minutes, an hour and a half, and then just look at the video that came out the next day. I don't know that I've seen the White House produce a video like that after meeting with another world leader. So that wasn't what we had all hoped, is that there would be the ability for us to really reestablish the relationship that had been damaged under the former Prime Minister. And I think that he did accomplish that.
Do you think that that will lead to anything that tangibly improves?
I think that he got a commitment that the president will be coming to the G7, and that they'll continue the conversation there, which is pretty good since the G7 is happening in mid-June. That's actually a pretty rapid movement. I would hope, and this is, I think, the hope of all the premiers, that we'd be able to move very quickly to a renegotiation of the Canada-U.S. free trade agreement. It might take a little bit longer than we had hoped, because I don't think we can live with this kind of uncertainty for the next 18 months. But we'll take the baby steps forward as we see them, and I think that there was a good step made yesterday.
Do you think that if we do embark on a renegotiation, that whatever concludes that negotiation, if it is in fact a different or renewed or NAFTA Part 3, Part 4, whatever it ends up being, do you think it can be trusted? And I ask because it has now been contravened on numerous occasions over the last few months by the president himself, who not only negotiated the deal but signed it. If you sign another one, does it mean much?
I would hope so. I mean, one of the things that we've seen is that even though he makes certain announcements, the implementation is a little bit different. Right now, 94% of the products going back and forth between Canada and the U.S. that are compliant with the Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement are tariff-free. We obviously have a problem with timber, we've got a problem with cars, we've got a problem with steel, and we've got a problem with aluminum. And so I actually think that shows the strength of that Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement, which is why it's so vital that we address the pressure points, see if we can get to a resolution, and then see if we can go back to having the same kind of tariff-free relationship we've been enjoying that is a benefit to both countries.
Ontario's Premier Doug Ford yesterday was asked about some of the conversation going on around separation, and in particular your own contribution to that conversation. He made the point, quote unquote, this is a time to unite against the tariffs and other threats from Donald Trump, not talk about things that separate us. Does he have a point there?
I think we've got two issues in Alberta. One is, of course, working with our fellow premiers and the Prime Minister on trying to get a renegotiated Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement. But the other is that we need to have a new deal with Ottawa as well. When I talk to Albertans, when you think about how fearful Canadians are of the impact that Donald Trump will have on the economy, that's how fearful Albertans are that an approach that the Liberals have taken for the last 10 years will continue and damage our economy. So I would like to see, and I'm hopeful that we can, I've had a good couple of first conversations with Prime Minister Carney, that we can address some of those pressure points and really unleash all of the investment that we know will happen in Alberta when some of those barriers are out of the way.
How is it helpful, though, Premier, with respect to open the door to, for example, a citizen-led referendum on separation, if your overall objective is to engage in more fruitful negotiations with the federal government? And if, in fact, that referendum results in a vote to separate, would you?
I would say there's a lot there. I would say that we were in the process of modifying all of our elections laws because we had heard that the thresholds for both recall and citizen initiative were too high, and so they were unrealistic. So that was a process that was taking place independently. It may well be that this is an issue around autonomy is the first one that garners enough signatures to be put to the people. But I would say my job is to look at what we see in the world out there. We've got 30 to 40% of Albertans polled saying that they are dissatisfied with the country to the point where they would consider it. And my job is to try to bring those numbers down. That's what I'm doing. That's why I have been told by my caucus and by the people that I speak with to give this new Prime Minister a chance to see if we can get to a deal. And that's what I intend to do, is to go into those discussions in good faith and hope that we can get to a resolution and a meeting of the minds.
Isn't the easiest way to quell that sentiment to say it won't happen?
Well, I think you can see that if there isn't an outlet, it creates a new party. In Quebec right now, the Parti Québécois is polling highest of the provincial parties, and we also see that the Bloc won a significant number of seats. I don't want to see that happen. I want to see us identify the issues that matter to people. Let's not demonize people. Let's acknowledge that the feelings that they have a root, and the root is in the way Alberta has been treated for the last 10 years by the Liberals. So that's genuine, and I'm being very direct with the Prime Minister and saying if we can solve some of these things, I think that will bring the temperature down, and that's what I'll continue to do.
If the vote is yes, would you pursue separation as Premier?
I have always said that I do not support separation. I support Alberta sovereignty within a united Canada. That's what our party supports as well. It's in our statement of principles. It's what my caucus supports. And that's my marching orders, is to do what we can to make sure that our autonomy is respected, the Constitution is respected, some of these damaging policies are removed. And I think we can end up with a deal that works not only for Alberta, but for the entire country.
So do I take that even if the vote is yes, that you would not pursue separation in your capacity as Premier?
My job is to make sure it doesn't get to yes. My job is to make sure that the temperature is brought down so much that there isn't even a need for a citizen-initiated referenda. And so I think that the Prime Minister has a window here in the next 6 months to be able to meaningfully address the issues that we've put on the table. And if he does, I think we can have a really constructive conversation about making the entire country an economic powerhouse, finding new markets, tearing down internal trade barriers. That's what I'm going to be focused on in the next 6 months.
And I have a few questions about those policies that you would certainly want him to consider. But saying that you don't want to get to the vote is not the same as saying that you wouldn't pursue it if it is a yes vote. Just to be clear to Canadians who are watching in Alberta and outside Alberta, if the citizens of your province vote to separate, are you going to pursue that?
What I have said is that I will respect the outcome of citizen-initiated referenda, and that's why it's my job to make sure it doesn't get to that point. I want Canada to be strong and united, and for provincial jurisdiction to be respected, and that's what I'll be working towards.
Surely, though, you can recognize, Premier, that the feasibility, even if the vote were to go ahead, is incredibly complicated, and some of the, for example, Indigenous people in your province have highlighted that. Healthcare transfers. How does your system work without them? Is it responsible to leave that door open in any way?
Well, I think that's up to constitutional scholars and to lawyers to discuss. At the moment, there isn't a petition campaign. There isn't a question. All there is I think some goodwill in trying to be able to resolve some of the issues that have burbled up over the last 10 years. And that's what my intention is going to be. But you may have to talk to a legal scholar about some of those issues. But there has been Supreme Court jurisprudence on this that has given some direction, and that may be a starting point for scholars to look into it.
I'm not even talking legally, though. I'm literally picturing Alberta, where you and I both know I lived for almost 5 years, with a healthcare system that does not have healthcare transfers. Like, how does that? Let's take the law out of it. Shouldn't you be honest with Albertans who are expressing this sentiment, which is, I understand, not coming from a place that isn't unfounded completely. That sentiment is not something to be dismissed. But shouldn't you be honest with them about what it would mean if they were to vote yes, and now that you've opened the door to following their instruction, what that would mean for their social services, for their health care, for a whole host of things?
I think you're getting ahead of yourself, Vassy. There is no question. There is no petition campaign. There is no vote. All there is me saying that I support a sovereign Alberta within a united Canada, and that I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that those issues are not ones that we have to deal with. I want Albertans to feel like their issues are addressed. And that's what my mandate is, and that's what I'll be working towards. I've said I'm not putting forward a provincial sponsored referendum on that issue. If citizens garner enough signatures, it will be put on a ballot, but it's certainly not something we're doing as a government.
Sure, and I take that point, but I would also point out that during this interview you said if the citizens do decide something, then your job, you said, is to respect their decision. I did want to also ask you about, though, the sort of in the interim, what you're looking for from the federal government, because you have made some very specific asks of them. And I wanted to ask against the backdrop of sort of the argument you've put forward, which is the economy of Alberta has suffered as a result of the policies pursued by the federal government. I went to your province's website today to look at, for example, energy production and oil production. From March 2025 to March 2024, Alberta produced 20.6 million cubic meters of oil, 3.6% higher year over year. The regulator's website in 2023, the most recent finding they could produce, said crude oil production continued to rise in that year, reaching an 8-year high. How is that evidence of destructive policy?
Well, I can tell you that we've had at least $175 billion worth of projects that have been canceled because of the actions of the federal government. Some direct, like their direct cancellation of Northern Gateway, which had been fully permitted. Some because of interference, like Energy East, which couldn't see the way through their new process to a completion. Same with Tex Frontier Mine. And it's been case after case after case of the federal government creating uncertainty. Imagine where we would be if we had all of those LNG projects that have been proposed and all of those energy projects that have been proposed, constructed over the past 10 years. Now we actually would have access to international markets. We really would be able to be less reliant on a single customer. That's, I think, the vision that we should be looking forward to the next 10 years. And that's why I'm hoping we can come to some agreement with Mark Carney that we need to look at the changes to Bill C-69, which has been called the No More Pipeline Bill, but it's also impacting mining project approvals in other provinces and various other things. And I put them out in the public. There's 9 different issues that I think would go a long way towards resetting the relationship, and I hope we can work through them.
And I think a lot of the criticism of the federal government is fair. I have interviewed minister after minister after minister in that portfolio and put very specific questions about their role. But the way that you frame it is not completely true. Like, for example, on Northern Gateway, that was a process that was deemed faulty by a court. The federal government decided not to push back or to appeal the decision from the courts. And that was under the Harper government that the process was found to be incomplete. On Energy East, the company behind it pulled out. Yes, the federal government had a hand in, of course, creating the regulatory environment that informed that, but ultimately they didn't kill it directly, and they did build TMX with $34 billion of taxpayer money from across the country, which does greatly benefit your province. So again, like, is it fair to frame it as everything they've done has hurt Alberta when production is up and there is a pipeline to Tidewater?
Well, I guess I have to ask how practical it is to expect that because the federal government has created such a chaotic investment environment, can they really build every pipeline, every transmission line, every port, every rail line with no private sector involvement because the private sector is so risk averse they won't build? That's the challenge for the federal government. Is their job is to create an environment where the private sector will come to the table. That's why I'm excited about the economic corridors argument. If we can address issues around First Nations ownership, environmental issues, and establish an area that projects can be built, now the private sector will come to the table. And that is, I think, a reset for Canada with the business community. And that's what we need to do. That a Trans Mountain pipeline could have been built for a fraction of the cost if it had been in the private sector. I don't think it's a victory that that taxpayers had to fork over 5 times the amount because the federal government had created so much uncertainty. That was the only way to get it built. I'm glad it's built, but you know what? We could get a whole lot more built if they would just create the kind of an investment environment that would attract those private sector dollars.
Just one final quick question. Has the Prime Minister indicated to you that he will demarcate himself from his predecessor on exactly what you just spoke of?
He has not said no. I have talked to him at length about the 9 issues that I put on the table, and he seems to be coming to the conversation with an open mind. And so that leaves me with some hope that we'll be able to find some common ground. And he is very keen to work with all of the provinces to identify key nation-building projects. I've identified several with him that I would like to work with him and other provinces on. And the proof will be what happens over the next 6 months. He's got a budget. He's got legislative sessions. This is something that we will get an indication of very quickly of whether or not he's willing to turn the page on the past 10 years and move forward in a different direction. And I'm hopeful that he does. I think it would be nation building, and I think it would be unifying. And so I'm going to keep an open mind and do my part to try to find some common ground.
I'll leave it on that note. Premier, appreciate your time as always. Thank you so much.